This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm doing a presentation on a State Records Committee meeting that occurred July 18th, 2024. It was styled on the agenda as Michael Clara versus Washington County, intervening party, Natalie Clawson, and Phil Lyman. This is part one on how did I end up at the State Records Committee with a case, as they styled it, 2024-115. Natalie Clawson, who is a candidate for lieutenant governor here in the state of Utah, she did a posting on X that kind of gives an overview on what happened that day. She says, update, appeal made to State Records Committee on Thursday, July 18 for access to list of names of people who signed Don Ibsen's signature packets. Cox hired the same company that Ibsen hired. Often, signature gatherers collect for multiple candidates at a time. Don Ibsen's list is involved in a criminal investigation. This raises concerns about Cox's list. Lyman and Clawson want access to both lists. The lists were verified by different counties. They want to compare the list. So what I'm going to do is, this is a slide presentation. This is part one. These are pictures from the Records Committee, and I'm going to go pretty fast through these slides on part one because I'm just giving you an overview. And then on part two and three and maybe part four, if we get up to that, I'll end up going slower and kind of diving into certain aspects of this overview presentation. And again, the title of it is, How Did We Get Here? So these are photos from the hearing that day, as the Records Committee staff did a good job at even getting a bigger room than normal and setting up the room so everybody was comfortable. And I've been to a number of hearings throughout the last few years, and I appreciate the effort that they put into making sure that the public square is safe and able to handle the people that showed up that day. And a lot of this is going to be like insider baseball. So hopefully, if you're watching this, you already have an overview that this has to do with the governor's race, with the incumbent Spencer Cox and Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson. And then the Republican nominees this year were Phil Lyman and Natalie Clawson. There was a story in the Deseret News. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I live here in Salt Lake City, and the chair of the Salt Lake County Republican Party had did a flyer just kind of highlighting the nominees of the party that had won the nomination from the delegates, if you will. And as you see here, Phil Lyman obtained 67.5% of the delegate vote. In this article, you can go back and read it. It just talks about SB 54 and kind of the conflict or the challenge, if you will, or as the article states, a tension between delegates or between candidates that go the signature route or candidates that go the convention route. And in this case, here are the players at the State Records Committee on July 18th. You have over here to the left Phil Lyman and Natalie Clawson, who were what's called, it's not a normal thing that happens in a hearing, but they utilized a part of the law that allows for an intervening party. And I was the original petitioner, and I had a witness, Karen Andrews, who's from Washington County, and I'll explain how her and I cross paths. And then you have here what's called the respondents. Eric Clark, who is a Washington County attorney, and one of his deputy attorneys, Stephen Scott. And we were before the State Records Committee, and I'll explain that path pretty quickly here in some other slides. But basically, the State Records Committee composes of 7 people. Only 5 of them were there that day, and this is their picture. Channel 4 News caught the 5 that were there. And all this comes from state law, which we call GRAMA, and GRAMA stands for the Government Records Access Management Act. It's in code here in the Utah Code under 63G-2-101. And the purpose of GRAMA is that the government's business is the people's business. And then state law allows for 5 classifications under which documents are not disclosed. And there's a balancing that should occur between whether a government agency is going to withhold records or is going to withhold them under one of these classifications or is going to release them, even if they are under one of these classifications. And the state Supreme Court back in 2008 in a famous case between Salt Lake County, who was trying to hide an investigation at the time, the Supreme Court ruled that GRAMA does not contemplate adversarial combat over record requests. It instead envisions an impartial, rational balancing of competing interests. Meaning, and I'll explain what the application of that here as we move along. But this is a general outline of how a records request occurs. You do a GRAMA, we call it a records request to the GRAMA officer, and then if it gets denied, you can appeal it to the chief administrative officer, and each agency has a different designated person for that. And then that's how you end up at the State Records Committee. And then if you don't like the decision of the State Records Committee, you can appeal in district court. This is what it looks like in the forms. You file over here to the left a GRAMA request form, and then if it gets denied, you can appeal it to the chief administrative officer, and then if that gets denied, then you appeal it to the State Records Committee. In this particular records request under GRAMA, the law says that viewing or obtaining list of signatures. So understand here, I kind of highlighted kind of what the foundation of this whole thing was about, is viewing or obtaining a list. There's 2 different ways to have these records in place. The records are custodian, and so the state law under GRAMA says that the records custodian signatures described in this law shall, upon request. And as anybody knows, when it comes to the law, shall means that you do it, and as opposed to may, or and so shall is pretty definitive in the law and its application of it. And it says that you shall, upon request, you can provide a list, or they can, or it says and view, the signatures. And basically what that means is to view them. This is what a form, a blank form would look like when people were signing the list, in this case of Ibsen, or we kind of talk about any candidate for that matter. This is what it looks like. You would sign, give your date of birth, your street address, the date that you signed it, and the name of your registered voter, and then that would be processed by the county clerk. And then it would turn into a list. This is what a signature list looks like. And this is State Board of Education, Norton's list, and I'll explain how we ended up obtaining a copy of that. So just looking at this from a timeline perspective, what happened was earlier this year on February 20th, 2024, Governor Cox declared on X, we have 28,000 signatures that they have submitted to the clerk. And I think at this point they knew that, that was the limit. And I think they ended up, a little over that were verified signatures. The law says for submitting the signatures that you have to submit them no later than 2 weeks prior to your nominating convention. So these guys were on it. I mean, they ended up submitting them like almost 2 months prior, because the nominating convention didn't happen until April 27. And so you had here Governor Cox and Deidre Henderson had submitted them 2 months prior. So they got their signatures in plenty of time. Here's a key point, the date that I want you to keep in mind. And by the way, this is this is how I got involved in this, because at the convention, some of the delegates from Washington County, and I have some friends down there, and they introduced me to some other people. They asked me if I can help them on a grandma request because they were telling me that on April 11th, in Washington County, there was an executive committee meeting, and that and this is Karen Andrews, who ended up being a witness at the state records committee in July. She was there, and this is her statement. She was there to testify about the fact that on April 11th, she was in this GOP executive committee meeting in Washington County, and that Ryan Sullivan, who was the county clerk, told them that he said that he had made a referral to the county attorney's office related to signatures collected, that it would be big news, and we would expect to see press release to this issue soon. And if I remember right, Senator Ibsen was the only list that they had. And then, the Norton list that I'll refer to in a second. Well, here it is right here. The reason that the delegates were concerned and they did grammar requests because Norton's list, who was on the Utah State Board of Education, her area spanned several counties. And so her signatures, and she did signatures to get on the ballot, she ends up losing at the convention in terms of delegate votes, like it was like 70% or something like that. I think more than that. So the only way Norton ends up being on the ballot is through the signatures. At this time, though, where we're at the convention, her signatures made it. She had enough verified ones, and I think that she had here we go, 2,000, and 2,003 of hers made it, but State Senate Ibsen didn't. He only 1,876 of his were able to be verified, and so he does not make it through. I think he ends up making it through convention, but he didn't have enough signatures. What these delegates in Washington County were questioning is that they had eyewitness accounts, or people told them that the signature gatherer was gathering signatures for both at the same time and for Governor Cox. So for the state, so he would give you three different lists to sign, and for the state senate, and their logic was, if Ibsen is in a small area, smaller than the Utah State Board of Education, Norton's area, then how does Norton get hers approved? The other thing that they found out, and that I learned from them, is that Norton's signatures got verified by Davis County, because it was multi-county, and there was like 30-something candidates outside of Davis County, or maybe including Davis County, that the clerk in Davis County, I guess that responsibility they received from the lieutenant governor's office to verify signatures and count the ballots at the primary election for these candidates that were multi-county throughout the state. So that was the question. And in this case, Ibsen's list was verified by Washington County itself. Norton's list was verified by the lieutenant governor, and their who they delegated that to was actually Davis County. And so here are the numbers, that they had. At one point, the people from Washington County were able to get some numbers from the lieutenant governor's office, and we can go over those at another part. And this is just really for, again, Norton and Ibsen, because that's how this started. I got involved to help them with that, and they sent me like this grandma denial letter from the chief administrative officer from the lieutenant governor's office, is Mallory Underwood, and she basically tells them these guys were trying to get a Norton signature list at the time, and they were denied. And I'm reading the law saying, I don't understand how this is denied. Let me go ahead and try to submit one myself. So this is May, where I'll go over real quick what happened to me in May, that I did a grammar request. In fact, I don't have it on this calendar, but I actually did a grammar request for the Norton list, and I actually get it. I wasn't denied like the delegates in Washington County were. And this is the records officer from the lieutenant governor's office saying, yeah, we can get you the Norton list. How do you want it? And remember that law that said you can either get it as a list of names or you can view the packets. I said, I want a list of names. I wasn't interested in the package. So I got a list of names, and he explains here, you can pause it and go back and read it, but he explains that getting the list is faster than viewing the package. So for my purposes, I wanted the Norton list for these delegates down south so they could compare it to the Ibsen list. Same thing, they were denied in their grammar request also in Washington County for the Ibsen list. So I did my own because it's easier for me to track and do appeals. And this is the process that I went through. And here's what it looks like when I submitted my grammar request for the Ibsen list in early May. And then the records officer, Mary Decker, sends me back a letter from Ryan Sullivan, who's a clerk auditor. Most counties have just a clerk and an auditor. Like in Salt Lake County, we have a clerk and an auditor separate. In this case, they've combined the two offices. In this case, Mary Decker, the records officer, responds to my records request for the Ibsen list and with a letter from the clerk auditor, Ryan Sullivan. And he says, we're not going to give you the list, but we will let you see the list or see the packets. And so I ended up submitting an appeal for the list because I want to see them, because now I want to compare this Ibsen list to the Norton list, if that makes sense. But he's allowing me to, he says that although they're protected, that I am going to be able to see them but not have a copy of it, which again, this is how GRAMA works. They can make a determination that that even though it's protected under one of these classifications of GRAMA, that they still have the authority to release it in the public interest, and he says as much. And this is just, I just kind of overlay the Supreme Court and how he actually is, in my opinion, implementing it properly or making the application properly in one sense by saying I can come view it, but on the other sense he's saying I can't have a list, which I appealed to the chief administrative officer, which in this case is the chairman of the commissioners. I send them an email and I say, okay, I'm going to be in St. George next week. Let me come view the list, the offer that you gave me to view. I'll go ahead and take that while I appeal you not giving me the list. But I ended up getting a letter from Victoria Hells that essentially countermands what the clerk auditor said. She's saying, you're not going to even be able to look at it now. And she says, because release of the records can compromise the investigation or impede future criminal prosecution. So basically what she's saying is that, she's disclosing here that there is a criminal investigation going on this Ibsen list. Now keep in mind here, this for me at the time wasn't a big surprise because this is consistent to what the people at the county executive committee for the GOP, Washington County GOP, were told on April, the first week in April, that there was an investigation going on. And in spite of that, I didn't think that, that would, the fact that there was an investigation would be a reason under GRAMA to not provide the record. But they're saying here that an ongoing and criminal, that these records are now protected because of an ongoing criminal investigation. So I appeal it to the, in this case, to the Commissioner Almquist, who is the chair of the commissioners down there. And so under GRAMA, that's what you do, you appeal it. And I just explained to him basically that here I say that the government must show by more than conclusionary statement how the particular kinds of investigatory records requested would interfere with the pending enforcement proceeding. Basically, GRAMA, some of the past cases, and this one went up to the Supreme Court, they ruled that just because there's an investigation ongoing doesn't mean you can't release a record. You have to demonstrate why. And that's what I tell him in the appeal. So now we're into June, and you kind of just see an overview here of when the primary election happened and what's going on. And I want you to concentrate on this June 10th, because there's a letter I'm going to bring up, and you kind of see where it fits in. So the previous month, as I showed you, I appealed when Washington County says, you can come view the list, but you can't have a copy. I appealed the not getting a copy. I also appealed the following week when they told me I couldn't view it. After 10 business days, Commissioner Almquist doesn't respond to my first appeal to him after 10 business days. So that's why on June 7th, I filed the appeal with the State Records Committee, and that's to obtain the list. Then on June 10th, keep this date in mind because we'll come back to that a couple more times. I do get a response from Commissioner Almquist, and the following day I appeal that because he upholds in a strange way the denial. So I appeal it to the State Records Committee. So they have both appeals, which are really for the same record, just in different formats. So this is what it looks like for grandma. In my case up to now, what's been going on is I submitted the records request to the records officer. I get a response from the clerk auditor saying, yeah, you can view it, but you can't have a copy. And then when I take them up on that offer, Victoria Hells, the deputy county attorney, says, no, you're not even going to look at it. And then I appeal it to the chief administrative officer, which is Commissioner Almquist. I get a response on June 10th. And the response is very bizarre because basically what he says here is that this appeal, he says up here that I am in receipt of your grandma appeal submitted on June 22nd and June 28th to the Washington County Commission. And he says that this appeal down here, response affirms that the county does not have any such records and cannot produce them. Grandma provides for production of an existing public record, and the county does not have anything responsive to this request. So that's bizarre because, as you saw, the clerk auditor and the county attorney, deputy county attorney, both acknowledged that they had the records that I was seeking, but they weren't going to give them to me. So here you have Commissioner Almquist saying, no, we don't even have it. So now I'm appealing to the State Records Committee. I can go over that in future parts of this, but in part one, we're just going to do an overview. But basically, I'm explaining to them the whole thing, like saying, this is also bizarre that the clerk and the auditor and the deputy attorney acknowledge having the records, and then you get the commissioner on appeal saying, no, we don't have the records, and so the denial is upheld. It's just weird. So after I filed my appeal, State Records Committee, the executive secretary sends out a letter saying that they've accepted my appeal and that now we're going to be scheduled for a hearing before the State Records Committee. And so this is early as June 13th. We're aware that on July 18th, we're going to be before the State Records Committee. Then, as a result of that, there's a provision in GRAMA that this is how the Lyman campaign got involved in this, because as you saw in the beginning, and again, this is a lot of insider baseball, so you kind of have to be familiar with this process or what was going on to understand this in context. But this is where Natalie Clawson, who is a candidate for lieutenant governor, the request to the State Records Committee to be part of this as an intervener, and the Records Committee accepted that, and that's how, and they explain why here they feel that this Ipsen list is important to the Lyman campaign. Now, later on that evening, after, as you see here, the date that Natalie Clawson sends us in saying that they're going to intervene is on Friday, June 21st at 4:26 p.m. And the Washington County is notified of this request. That evening, as you see, Deseret News published a story at 7:35, quoting the Washington County attorney is calling this what's supposed to be an investigation irregularities. He said he was looking into the matter to do his due diligence and build public trust, which, as you'll see, is just ironic that he would say that he's not even calling it an investigation. He's saying he's looking into this matter. And again, keep in mind the dates. Here we are, June 21st. He's publicly making a statement about an investigation that, according to members of the Washington County GOP, that he's had for over a month now, going on 2 months. And here he says that, it's just doing his due diligence. And then Deseret News interviews the company, which in this case was Gathering Inc. They talked to this guy, Tanner Lyman, who says, no, it's not even an investigation. He says that he was aware of this back in February or March. Which could make sense if Ipsen had turned in his signatures that early, because remember, we know that Governor Cox turned his in, and they had the same company. So Governor Cox knew as early as February 20th. So it would make sense that Washington County clearly knew that there was a problem well, I don't know about clearly, but they could have definitely known in February or March, because we have evidence that they definitely declared that to the GOP on the county level in April. So then, following this interview by Deseret News, I sent a letter to Eric Clark in advance of the hearing and just explained to him, my opinion based on his public statements. I remind him. I said, look, here's a letter I sent to Chairman Gil Almquist, and the chairman doesn't even respond to it. He says that they don't even have the records, and I'm just reminding Eric Clark, as you go to this hearing, maybe you can address this issue, and hear the arguments that I gave to Chairman Gil Almquist, and he just ignored them. But these are the same arguments that I'm going to present, that I did present to the State Records Committee. And so this is the letter that I sent to Clark. And I also explained to him that I kind of outlined here on the left all the runaround that I've received from people at the in Washington County. One of the things that I should have pointed out sooner, but you'll start to see it here, is the issue of accountability, of government accountability. The people who excel, like these guys, especially Attorney Eric Clark, is a master at the 5 Ds, the deception, deflection, denial, and defend and diffuse. You see those, keep those in mind, and you'll constantly see those tactics deployed here. But the problem is that when that happens in government, that's just that kind of culture that clearly his department, or I guess all of Washington County government, is that kind of culture. It thrives in an environment where there is no accountability. So this is one of the things that my recommendation is: if you live in Washington County, you need to eradicate county government from being able to utilize these 5 Ds. Recognize them, and again, they're deception, deflection, denial, defend, and diffuse. This is all he does here. You need to eradicate that from county government and hold them accountable for hiding these documents. And so, I'll go over this letter more, what I'm telling him. And basically I end this letter to Eric Clark on June 11th by saying that the county clerk had already allowed us, or already allowed me, said you can view the record, or the county attorney stepped in and changed that. So let me see if I can spend a little more time on this part, that on July 11th, because if you're going to go to a hearing in Grandma, you're required, if you're the quote unquote respondent, in this case, a government agency, you're required to submit a brief as to your legal arguments 5 business days before the hearing, which they did. And this is just stunning what we end up seeing. And again, this is before the hearing, and this deputy county clerk, Stephen Scott, submitted these documents that you see here. And one of the ones and he submits a brief. Their brief is really heavy on the packets, and that why they don't want to release the packets, which if you'll have time, you go back to my letter that I sent Eric Clark the week before. I make it clear to him that I'm interested in the list as opposed to viewing the package. But in their brief, they never address really the issue of the list. And you know what that looks like, because I showed you early on. And in this case, they just say the package. They go all over the package on their written brief prior to the hearing. The other interesting thing that they focus in on in their brief is about the election and about the deadlines of the election. And I'll point out just how ridiculous that is, because really under GRAMA, the government agency has no business. How do I say this? Has under GRAMA, you're not required to tell them why you need the records. I've often done records requests, and they'll send me an email and say, "Why do you not Washington County, but other why do you need them?" I say, "I'm not required under GRAMA to tell you why I need them. You're required to provide them because they're public." And in this case, he goes on. It's not his business to do this finger wagging towards the Lyman campaign about the elections and what they're going to do with these records and stuff. Nonetheless, that's what he does. And ironically, he talks about deadlines, that if he was worried about deadlines, then he should have implemented an investigation in early April. He could have been, I'm retired from law enforcement, and I can tell you this is not a very difficult case, and it could be, disposed of pretty quickly. But he's dragging it on. Here we are in July, and he still hasn't done anything with a case that we know they had at the first week of April. But nonetheless, he's going to give the Lyman campaign a lecture on when they should be doing things, and they should be doing this in the courts and not, it's just ridiculous, because it has nothing to do, this isn't his role. A place, but in the briefing, I'll come back to that statement, but in the briefing that they gave to the Records Committee that Scott did, they have an affidavit by another attorney that he's a chief deputy attorney, and he's a chief prosecutor, chief criminal prosecutor. He says on or about May 24th that Ryan Sullivan, the Washington County Clerk Auditor, requested that Washington County Attorney's Office conduct a criminal investigation regarding falsifying signatures that were gathered on behalf of Don Ibsen. So, if you live in Washington County, this is a question that needs to be asked, because remember, we have an eyewitness account, and she was there at the records hearing, and she's telling us that on April 11th, and here it is, that the clerk himself said that he made a referral to the county attorney's office related to the signature. This is on April, so he did it prior to April 11th, or on April 11th at the latest, according to this statement. That's what he told the Washington County GOP. So it begs the question then, who's telling the truth here? You have the chief deputy, he has a chief deputy attorney and the chief criminal prosecutor for Washington County saying that he actually received the referral from Ryan Sullivan on May 24th, 2024. So again, if you're in Washington County, I would if I lived in that county, I would be all over this, and I would demand some honesty on this, because somebody is lying, or they need to give an explanation as to why there's a discrepancy on when Sullivan, the clerk auditor, referred this to the county attorney's office, because again, somebody's lying. So again, going back to the GRAMA process, here we are. One of the things that I want to point out, that in this, I'm kind of going to a different subject here, but still about the briefing. The Scott, who's the attorney, the deputy attorney who submitted this to the State Records Committee, he ends up submitting an entirely different letter from the one I received on June 10th. And you see here in red, I marked, they actually added things. You still have the signature of Gil Almquist, who is the commissioner chair, and you still have the date of the letter. So this is the actual letter that they sent to me on June 10th. And this is the one where he says they don't have the records, but in this one, this enhanced version that the Records Committee, that the Attorney Scott sends to the Records Committee, they added stuff to it, which is falsifying, in my opinion, a government document to the Records Committee. And so I when I read that the following day, I send this email you see here on June 12th. I'm sorry, July 12th, because I received this, I believe it came from Scott the day before, and I'm pointing this out to him. I'm saying this letter that you're submitting to the records committee is fabricated, because that's not the letter that I received. The other thing that it does, because that fabricated letter's on there, when he makes a statement of facts and submits that to the records committee, he's able to point out things that are not true, like saying that the chair upheld the appeal, which he didn't, because you saw the original one, he didn't even address it. He says, we don't even have the records that you're requesting. And then in this one, Scott is calling me a liar. He says, number 5, contrary to the requester's assertion, the county commission chair did not claim that the Ibsen packets did not exist. The county commission chair upheld the decision of the county attorney's office to deny production or review of the Ibsen packets. Again, if I lived in Washington County, I would just come unhinged about this, because think about this. If these guys are willing to lie and make stuff up about a records hearing, the first question for me is, why are they putting this much energy into holding this Ibsen list? That makes me want to see it more, because now I know something's going on. Again, I'm retired from law enforcement. I know how suspects act out on the street, and I know how to detect deception. And over the years, because I've served in public office as a mayor in Texas and on the school board here in Salt Lake, I've learned how to detect, and you don't really have to learn it. You can just see it. I mean, anybody watching this up to this point can see for themselves, these guys are lying. And they're making up documents, which to me is illegal to do that. And to make a statement calling me a liar, because based on your false fabricated letter. So this is something that I believe, if you're in Washington County, you should demand an explanation as to why these deceptions. And we haven't even got to the hearing. So here the hearing, time-wise, occurs. And I'll go over that in parts 2 and 3 about what happened, maybe part 3, what happened at the committee hearing itself. But the result of it is, as shown here in the media, that the records committee sided with the Washington County, that they did not have to release the Ibsen list. And because a lot of it, Washington County is doing these 5 Ds, of deception and deflection, denial, and diffusion. You can see those in play, and the records committee fell for it, unfortunately. This one member here, I believe her name is Peterson. She is a representative for the media. She actually voted, she voted against the motion, which allows for the release of the Ibsen record. And again, there was 5 of them, so it was a 4-1 vote. So what this slide is showing is that the afternoon of the 18th, we had this hearing in the morning of the 18th. That afternoon, I submitted a grammar request, another one, to Washington County. And basically what I'm asking for, and I'm showing here on the left, that the week prior, I had asked the attorney Scott, what's going on? How is it that you're submitting a letter that's false to the records committee? And he doesn't respond. So, he had a whole week to respond, doesn't rectify what's going on, allowed that to be set with the records committee. I brought it to their attention, but I don't think they worried about it. Because I think a lot of times it's hard to believe that a governmental entity is going to lie that blatantly. So now I'm doing a grammar request. I'm saying, look, since you didn't respond to my email of last week, then now I want your emails about this letter. Let's see what's going on. Later on that evening, the Lyman loses records request challenge, but lawsuit for Cox signatures is still pending. And then there's an interview done by KSL. And here you have Eric Clark that day saying, the day of the hearing, that it says frustrated Lyman supporters also argue the investigation has been ongoing since April. Correct. And is taking too long. No case number has been filed, Michelle Steele said. That's something Clark admitted is a problem. Although he said the timeline for Lyman to make this type of election challenge has expired. Number one, if he was really worried about timelines, he would have done the investigation in April. And he could have been done with this investigation the first or second week of April and provided the Ibsen list, and the results of his investigation would have been known to the public. And guess what? The Lyman campaign would have been able to meet all their deadlines that he's claiming that they've expired. Right, they've expired because of you. And I don't understand why people don't see that. And again, if I lived in Washington County, I would just be unhinged about that and be going to like the commissioners meeting. I think there's one coming up it's the first Tuesday of every month. So there's one next week. I would be at that meeting with like the people from the executive committee of the Washington County GOP should be there. Anybody who's interested in this issue and lives in Washington County should be at the county commissioners meeting asking for an explanation on this. That why did he sit on this? Why is he allowing he's blaming it's kind of like that thing, the kid that kills his parents, and then now he's in court and he begs for the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. That's what this guy's doing. Is that he's finger wagging at the Lyman campaign for something that he created. He put them in a situation that he's turning around and being critical of them. It's hypocritical. And it's a blatant sign of deception on his part, which I would think that a district attorney, dealing with criminals all the time, could be better at deception, but he doesn't even do it well. And he said, and then he says, I have to acknowledge that's a fair point from people. We haven't prioritized it at the top of our list because in our mind, all of the time frames have already run out. That's not true. In April, that wasn't the case. So the other thing is, keep in mind that the Lyman campaign doesn't even know that this is under criminal investigation until I get notified of that in mid-May. And someone else told them, and they reached out to me, and that's why now, this is important to them that a criminal investigation is going on. Again, maybe somebody should have reached out to the Lyman campaign in April when they were told at Washington County, but I don't think people knew that there was a connection at the time between the Ibsen list and the Cox list. But anyways, we'll cover that in a future podcast here. So here a couple days later, Natalie Clawson, who is the candidate for lieutenant governor, says, pro tip, if you want to conceal grammar requests, government documents from the public, claim they are under criminal investigation. Absolutely no evidence or case number of an investigation of the investigation needed. She says, see decision of State Records Committee. And again, this is, by the way, here on the far right, if I didn't point that out already, that's my witness, Karen Andrews, who kind of was the one that sparked all this, because she was she was the delegate. Her and some other delegates were the ones wanting to compare the Norton and Ibsen list. And then when they do grammar requests initially, they were denied. And then when I'm doing them, I get the Norton list, but yet here we are with the Ibsen list, still fighting over it. As I point out that the Records Committee, and we'll go over this more about what happened at that hearing in a future podcast, but in this one, I just want to point out one of the statements by the Records Committee. On July 22nd, they gave their order in writing, but they do point out that although they sided with Washington County, which it's my intent to appeal this to district court, by the way, what the Records Committee decided. And this is, again, Channel 4. These are the 5 that were there. And but they do say, with that said, we take a moment to sympathize with the frustration of a seemingly slow investigation effort by respondent, which is Washington County attorney. Its presentation to the committee was indeed problematic in assuring that the investigation is being zealously pursued. After all, election fraud is quite a serious matter and warrants vigorous investigation. For this, we acknowledge the public's frustration, and we express our hope that respondent hears its constituents loud and clear in demanding the investigation be properly prioritized and accelerated, and the citizenry informed that it is taking the matter extremely serious. Now, you guys know this. If you're watching this and you watched it this far, then you're interested in this issue. You know the government's only going to respond to the pressure that's brought to bear on them. And my recommendation again is you should be at every commissioner meeting that they have and use the portion of the public speaking. I would have people protesting outside and say, this is ridiculous. The county commissioners should bring to bear their pressure. And again, I don't know what role County Commissioner Alquist has in this. Why did he sign 2 letters? You guys need to find out if this is your county and these are your elected officials. You need to run them out of office, or they better come up with some good explanations. But you got to be on top of this, because this is a symptom of a bigger problem. If they're willing to do this on this, you can only imagine what other things are occurring over there. This doesn't engender any kind of trust. And let me tell you why. And I'll close with this. Remember when I sent this email to Scott here on the left, July 12th, and I said, dude, your letter, the letter that you sent from Commissioner Alquist, that's not the one that I got. I haven't even seen this letter, the one that you sent to the Records Committee. He doesn't respond to this email. I do a grammar request the day of the hearing that afternoon. And then on Tuesday, July 23rd, he responds back and he says, he called me and told me what happened. This is, my grammar request sparked him, to give me an explanation verbally. And I said, well, I want it in writing. And he says, per our conversation, I explained that I compiled and submitted the final packet for the State Records Committee hearing that was held on July 18th. There were 2 county responses in our files, both dated June 10th, and both signed accordingly. When finalizing the county's SRC hearing packet, the State Records Committee hearing packet, I used number 1, see attached, because it was a more complete response. However, I was unaware that you never received it. I have since been informed that you only received 2, the response 2, which is the one I did receive. I apologize for the miscommunications. But you see, he's not being honest here, because he was aware, right here on the left. On July 23rd, he said, I was never aware. Dude, you were aware. I sent you an email on July 12th, and I CC'd everybody and their dog. So even if you missed the email, Eric Clark got it, Victoria got it, there was other people got it in Washington County. They could have pointed it out to you. But you did nothing to correct the record or to fix this before the Records Committee. You allowed the lie to go through. And then after the fact, only because I do a grammar request for your emails on this issue, you're gonna confess what happened. So again, you guys, if you live in Washington County, you guys have problems. You need to, I wouldn't wait for election time, but these guys are liars. And they, I kind of try to put it in a nicer way of the 5 Ds. These guys are, they're just rotten. And if this is the culture in Washington County, I guarantee you, and you know this, if you're involved in government and you could sit through this whole thing, good and well, there's other problems going on. This is just, we're able to document, the dishonesty and the corruption, in my opinion, that's going on in Washington County, and it needs to be addressed. In my opinion, this is a minor thing. This Ibsen list, and these guys are doing all the 5 Ds, to keep them hidden. Something's wrong. So I'm determined, as just an individual, to see this through and to appeal this to the district court to get a copy of this Ibsen list. And people in Washington County, you guys, it's a call to, I'm recommending you guys do a call to action. And look at, go back, and if you need this paperwork, I can send it to you. It's all public, and you guys need to get accountability going in Washington County.